15 years of my life vanished in a 10-minute meeting. No warning, no gratitude, just a cold explanation about a younger replacement with a familiar last name. They called it strategic evolution, but I knew exactly what it was. Nepotism in a tailored suit. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I walked out silently because I already knew something they didn't. How much of their success had my fingerprints on it? And soon, they'd feel what it's like to run a company without the one person who held it together. If you've ever been underestimated, subscribe and tell me your story below. They didn't even look up when I walked into that sterile conference room. 3 executives in their expensive suits, 1 HR representative clutching her tablet like a shield, and the new intern who suddenly had his own security badge and parking spot. The room reeked of burnt coffee and fresh betrayal, that unmistakable corporate smell when they're about to destroy someone's life with carefully crafted euphemisms. I knew what was coming before they opened their mouths. It wasn't just the heavy silence or the manila folders stacked like tombstones on the polished table. They were never brave enough to fire someone like me face to face, unless the decision had already been approved by the board, packaged by legal, and rubber-stamped by executives who'd never spent a single night debugging code or explaining to clients why their data was safe. "This isn't easy for us, Gloria," began Richard White, the chief operating officer, using that same patronizing tone he reserved for press apologies and broken promises to shareholders. I'd heard him use it with others during the quarterly layoffs. I never imagined I'd be sitting in the hot seat, on the receiving end of his rehearsed compassion. "Your contributions over these years have been absolutely invaluable to our growth," he added, then paused dramatically as if expecting me to thank him for acknowledging my existence. I didn't. Instead, I was studying the intern. No, not an intern anymore. Matthew White, Richard's nephew, recent MBA graduate from some prestigious school, 0 field experience, 0 understanding of the complex systems I'd designed, built, and maintained. Yet there he sat in his crisp shirt and confident smirk, like he'd earned his place at that table through merit instead of bloodlines. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want their manufactured answers. I'd witnessed enough over the past 3 months to understand I'd become an inconvenient obstacle to their vision of progress. Secret meetings I was mysteriously excluded from. My detailed reports suddenly redirected through junior staff. Expensive consultants brought in from Silicon Valley to question and modernize processes I'd built from absolute scratch during nights and weekends. I'd stayed late countless times, personally trained 6 department heads, architected the core data infrastructure that powered their entire operation, and was still actively supporting 3 major product lines that generated millions in revenue. But none of that legacy mattered when the people in power needed to demonstrate they could modernize, innovate, and attract younger talent. They dressed up their betrayal in polished boardroom language: digital transformation, agile methodologies, next-generation thinking, disruptive innovation. But underneath all the corporate buzzwords, it meant exactly the same thing it always meant: out with the experienced and stable, in with the young and shiny. I walked out of that room with no visible emotion on my face, maintaining the same professional composure I'd shown for 15 years. I nodded politely when they offered me their pre-calculated severance package in a folder marked "Confidential." I even shook Richard's hand with genuine grace. His palm was sweaty and trembling. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like the longest journey of my entire career. Not because I felt ashamed or embarrassed, but because I didn't feel those things at all. That emotional numbness scared me more than the job loss itself. Maybe some deep part of me had been unconsciously expecting this moment, sensing it was inevitable. I'd noticed the subtle shift in their body language when I spoke up too confidently in client meetings, or politely corrected their calculations in front of potential investors. They didn't want experience and institutional knowledge. They wanted compliant yes people who wouldn't challenge their questionable decisions. And I had never been built for that kind of professional submission. My corner office was already completely packed when I returned. Someone from facilities had efficiently boxed up 15 years of my professional life while I was being terminated. They'd even attached a generic sticky note that read, "Gloria H. Personal Effects," like I was an expired inventory item rather than a human being who dedicated the best years of her career to building their success. But in their efficiency, they'd overlooked something important. Hidden in the back of my locked desk drawer was a thick folder they'd missed entirely. It contained internal security audits, detailed risk assessment maps, and confidential memos about critical security gaps that had never been properly addressed by management. It wasn't revenge material, not yet anyway, but it was a powerful reminder that they hadn't successfully erased everything I knew, and I definitely hadn't spoken my final words on the matter. I didn't argue with security or demand explanations from HR. I didn't ask for reference letters or attempt to negotiate better terms. I simply left that building with everything that truly mattered, still securely stored in my head and my professional network intact. I didn't walk out defeated, bitter, or broken. I walked out completely clean, with my integrity and dignity undamaged. And while they were busy celebrating their fresh-faced addition in the executive conference room, patting themselves on the back for their bold modernization move, they failed to notice that the foundational infrastructure I'd spent years building was already developing serious cracks that would soon become devastating structural failures. They talked about progress like it was a revolutionary new software application, something you could simply download and install over the previous version, without bothering to verify what critical systems still functioned underneath. But Iron Shield Technology's sterling reputation hadn't been constructed through flashy PowerPoint presentations or headline-grabbing executive hires. It had been meticulously assembled line by line, firewall by firewall, security protocol by security protocol over countless years, when no one else in that company possessed the technical expertise to prevent sensitive client data from hemorrhaging through the countless digital vulnerabilities that plague modern corporations. When management was handing out commemorative coffee mugs celebrating the company's 5-year anniversary, I was already deep into version 3 of the proprietary security engine that single-handedly saved our multi-million-dollar contract with the Department of Education, when their first chief technology officer completely panicked during a major data breach crisis in 2012, threatening to destroy our reputation and trigger devastating lawsuits. I was the one who worked through the entire night patching critical vulnerabilities and drafting the carefully worded public statement they sent to media outlets the following morning. The executives called our survival pure luck. I called it understanding your own technological infrastructure well enough to prevent catastrophic failures before they could destroy everything you'd built. They loved to believe that Iron Shield had successfully scaled to industry prominence because of visionary leadership and strategic decision-making. What they systematically refused to acknowledge was that their systems actually functioned reliably because of rock-solid architecture, because someone on their team possessed the professional discipline to engineer solutions that wouldn't catastrophically collapse when venture capital investors started demanding rapid expansion or when senior leadership completely changed every 18 months. They conveniently forgot who had personally trained their second and third generation development security operations team leaders. Who had built the comprehensive internal onboarding documentation wiki that even Matthew had extensively used during his first weeks at the company? Who had written the complex logic tree for the automated threat response protocol that won us our most lucrative pharmaceutical industry client worth millions in annual recurring revenue? It was me. Every single technical innovation they took credit for. I didn't require public recognition, company-wide acknowledgement, or press releases announcing my contributions. I needed to know that my work functioned flawlessly under extreme stress, that it provided genuine protection for people who didn't even understand what sophisticated digital threats they faced daily. They forgot my contributions because they never truly comprehended what I actually did during those long nights and weekend debugging sessions. To them, I was simply legacy technology, the middle-aged woman in the corner office who never updated her wardrobe and consistently preferred substance and reliability over speed and marketability. I wasn't the kind of employee you featured prominently on stage during glamorous product launch events. I was the person you called in desperation when the launch servers crashed and millions of dollars in contracts hung in the balance. But when systems work too efficiently and seamlessly, people gradually stop noticing them entirely. And when they stop noticing critical infrastructure, they start believing they can easily replace the person who built it. That fundamental misunderstanding was their catastrophic mistake. They forgot that I hadn't simply contributed to their success. I had embedded myself so deeply into their foundational systems that removing me was like removing the steel framework from a skyscraper. While they were frantically chasing the next big technological trend, they never paused to consider what would happen if the institutional knowledge they'd taken for granted decided to walk away and build something better elsewhere. They weren't expecting the phone call. Not from an unfamiliar number with an Austin area code. Not just 48 hours after they'd discarded me like outdated hardware that no longer served their corporate vision. I almost let it go straight to voicemail, but something deep in my professional instincts, maybe years of experience reading between the lines, maybe wounded pride seeking validation, compelled me to answer anyway. "Miss Harper." The voice was soft yet razor-sharp, unmistakably professional, not anxious or desperate, but deliberately intentional. "My name is Stephen Mercado. I'm the founder of Grayline Security. I'd like to speak with you privately, completely off the record, about an opportunity that might interest someone with your particular expertise." The company name was familiar to me from industry publications and specialized cybersecurity forums. Grayline Security, a relatively small but highly respected firm headquartered in Austin, known primarily in specialized professional circles for ethical surveillance solutions and cutting-edge data autonomy platforms. They weren't flashy self-promoters or venture capital darlings, but they were undeniably brilliant. Quietly, strategically brilliant. I agreed to meet face-to-face, not out of bitterness or desperation for immediate employment, but because genuine curiosity compelled me to understand why someone of Mercado's reputation would specifically seek out someone like me. We arranged to meet at a quiet, understated cafe near downtown Austin. Stephen was considerably younger than I'd anticipated, maybe mid-30s, but he didn't communicate like someone with anything to prove to the world. He didn't deliver a polished sales pitch or try to impress me with company achievements. Instead, he asked thoughtful, technically sophisticated questions that no executive at Iron Shield had ever bothered to explore. Questions about long-tail security breach patterns, about dangerous automation gaps in enterprise user permission systems, about advanced threat vectors that revealed he understood my specialized work better than the people who'd just callously discarded my expertise. "We're building something revolutionary," he explained with quiet confidence, "but we're not interested in simply rebuilding what already exists in the marketplace. We want to evolve and create what comes next in cybersecurity." Then he paused thoughtfully, leaned back in his chair, and said something that caught me completely off guard. "We've extensively studied Iron Shield's infrastructure architecture. We know their critical weaknesses and vulnerabilities. We want you to help us avoid making the same fundamental mistakes they've made." He wasn't fishing for corporate secrets or insider information that could create legal problems. He wanted strategic direction, authentic architecture expertise, guidance rooted in real-world battlefield experience. I didn't immediately accept his offer, not during that first conversation, but I listened intently to every word. And the more I absorbed his vision, the more I realized I wasn't finished building innovative solutions. Not because I desperately needed revenge against my former employers, but because I absolutely refused to let my professional legacy end in the shadow of someone else's incompetence and nepotism. Grayline didn't offer me an impressive executive title or corner office with a view. They offered me something far more valuable: genuine trust and intellectual freedom. They provided space to think creatively, to challenge conventional assumptions, to architect revolutionary systems without constantly apologizing for possessing more technical knowledge than the people around me. And for the first time in years of corporate frustration, I didn't have to waste energy proving my professional relevance to skeptical colleagues. I just had to focus on building something extraordinary. I worked in silence, remotely under a non-disclosure role that gave me access without exposure. No one at Iron Shield knew. Not that they would have recognized my influence anyway. I rewrote protocols, scaled decision trees, restructured a zero-trust framework that anticipated human error instead of just punishing it. I wasn't rebuilding what I'd lost. I was designing something that couldn't be taken from me. And while Iron Shield celebrated their quarterly culture sprint, I was laying the foundation for something heavier, something designed to compete, not with press releases, but with precision. The whisper that found me wasn't an invitation to look backward. It was a reminder that the best way to respond to disrespect is to become the benchmark they can no longer reach. We didn't announce anything. No flashy campaigns, no rebranding. Grayline Security wasn't interested in noise. It was built for precision, for staying under the radar while others chased headlines, which suited me perfectly. While Iron Shield hosted webinars about innovation, I rewrote the playbook for resilience. We started with nothing, just a concept, a skeleton team, and the brutal clarity of knowing what not to do. Every feature I designed at Grayline answered a failure Iron Shield had ignored. Where they layered complexity to mask fragility, I stripped ours to the bone. Fast, clean, secure. We didn't build for demos. We built for breaches that hadn't happened yet. Matthew White, their new visionary, was busy posting motivational clips on LinkedIn talking about legacy tech like it was a disease. Meanwhile, I redesigned our encryption tree so that even internal teams couldn't access unnecessary user threads. Our systems were invisible but unbreakable. I built them in long stretches of silence, usually at night in a room with no plaques and no distractions. And every time I wrote a line of code or signed off on a protocol, I remembered the day I walked out of Iron Shield with a sticky note on my last box, like I was an expired asset. I didn't hate them. I just stopped making room for them in my thinking. We launched our beta with 5 enterprise clients. Iron Shield didn't even blink. Their executive floor still believed we were a boutique privacy firm. Nothing more. They didn't see us as a threat, just another footnote in a market they assumed they owned. But the ground was already shifting. We moved faster, responded sharper, and attracted clients who were tired of being sold shiny dashboards that couldn't survive a live breach. In private calls, CTOs started asking questions that sounded familiar about scalable logic frameworks, about adaptive AI trust layers, about the kind of resilience Iron Shield used to promise and no longer delivered. I didn't say anything. I let the numbers speak. I let performance reports circulate. I let the industry start noticing, not me, not even Grayline, but the shift, the sense that something quieter, stronger, more prepared had arrived. And while Matthew posed for team photos, I outpaced him line by line without saying a word. Because in tech, reputation can be engineered, but trust has to be earned. And I was done being the backbone for people who thought visibility was leadership. It started with a bid Iron Shield thought they'd already won before they even submitted it, a multi-year security infrastructure contract for a federal digital health agency. Big money, bigger exposure, the kind of contract that became the anchor for future deals. The one that got you invited to panels, mentioned in Forbes, listed as a case study in MBA textbooks. They'd had the contract before, when I was still there, when the agency's lead auditor called me directly every time their threat panel blinked. But that was 3 years ago. Now it was a competitive rebid, open proposal, clean slate. Grayline Security submitted under our full name with Mercado as the signing executive. My name never appeared in the package, but every page echoed language I'd been perfecting for 18 years. Modular resilience plans, logic-first implementation timelines, ethical override safeguards, systems designed not for optics, but for field friction. We didn't decorate our presentation. We didn't include buzzwords. We included proof, real use cases, an implementation timeline that didn't overpromise. And we submitted it quietly, 5 hours before the deadline. The first email I got came a week later from a former Iron Shield engineer, still on their mailing list. Did you see this? The subject line was all I needed. The leaked shortlist showed 2 finalists, Iron Shield Labs and Grayline Security. That was the moment I knew we weren't just competing, we were being taken seriously. The real crack came 3 weeks later at the closed-door presentation event in Washington, D.C. Each finalist had 45 minutes to present. Iron Shield went second. I wasn't in the room, of course, but I'd seen their playbook. I helped write earlier versions of it in the past. They'd lean on brand, on legacy, on client retention metrics, dress it up with fluffy language. Matthew would be there. He loved the stage. He'd smile, say disruption 4 times, show animations. But what he wouldn't have, what he couldn't fake, was our new framework. Grayline's presentation was led by Mercado. Calm, confident, not slick. Every point tied to a deliverable. Every claim backed by modules that worked in an open test sandbox. And when they asked the key question, how does your system handle longitudinal access control without compromising breach traceability? We gave the answer Iron Shield never figured out. Because I wrote that answer 2 years ago, and they shelved it in favor of something flashier. 2 days later, the agency posted the decision. Grayline Security awarded full contract. Iron Shield Labs not selected. The silence was louder than any announcement. Emails stopped. Industry channels went quiet. On Slack, someone forwarded me a screenshot of Matthew's reaction post. Disappointed with the process, proud of our team. No mention of Grayline. Just corporate pain dressed as resilience. But what broke them wasn't the contract. It was the realization that whoever beat them knew their system too well, that someone had seen their gaps from the inside and no one knew who it was. The empire didn't fall in fire, it cracked under the weight of its own illusion. And as the dust settled, they finally had to admit they were no longer the future. They were just loud. And I'd never needed to raise my voice. The first message came from an unknown address. Hi, Gloria. Long time no see. We were hoping to reconnect. Maybe grab coffee. No name. Just that vague, weightless tone of someone pretending there's no history between us. I didn't respond. Then came the second one from Richard White himself. A carefully worded email full of phrases like, "We regret the timing of your departure," and "We value your institutional knowledge." He even mentioned a potential executive advisory position. Temporary, of course, but with long-term potential. I read it once, then archived it. No response. After that, a call. I let it go to voicemail, then another, and another. I stopped counting. What none of them seemed to understand was that I didn't need to go back. They thought offering me a title would fix what they'd broken. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about being free. I hadn't just found a new company. I'd found a new version of myself. One not trapped in apologies, not filtered through boardroom politics. They'd underestimated me for years, dismissed my ideas, cut me out of conversations, and replaced me with a last name. Now they were scrambling to rebuild what they'd discarded because their new architecture couldn't bear the weight. And somehow they still believed this could be resolved over lunch. I never spoke to Matthew again, but I saw his name removed from several committees within weeks. Strategic realignment, they called it this time. Familiar words, hollow words. I changed my LinkedIn to private the day Grayline's contract was announced. Not because I was hiding, because I was done being seen through their lens. The industry didn't need to know where I was to feel what I'd done. Impact speaks louder than profiles. Silence can be sharper than any press release. And sometimes the most devastating response is no response at all. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let them sit in their conference rooms and dissect timelines and chase shadows trying to figure out how they lost what they never valued. I moved forward. They stayed behind. And that was the real victory. There was no moment where I stood over the ruins. No scene where I declared victory. That's not how it works. Iron Shield didn't implode in a single day. It eroded slowly, decision by decision. Ego layered over incompetence until even the scaffolding I'd left behind couldn't hold it together. But I wasn't watching. Not anymore. I'd moved on to cleaner problems. Real ones. At Grayline, the questions were different. No one asked me to dumb things down to flatter an investor's attention span. No one copied my ideas, removed my name, and handed them to someone louder. My job was to think, to solve, to build what came next. And that changed me more than I'd expected. When you spend years trying to prove your worth to people who've already decided you're invisible, you forget what it feels like to be heard. Not tolerated, not humored. Heard. I remember walking into Grayline's Austin office 6 weeks after the contract when it was quiet. No gold plaques, no vanity walls, just whiteboards full of unfiltered ideas. Someone had written one of my old system flow diagrams on the glass trying to solve an edge case. They didn't know I was the original author. They were just using it because it worked. I stood there for a moment listening to the team talk through it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt useful. Not because of history, but because I still had something to give. That was the difference. At Iron Shield, I was the past they were trying to erase. At Greyline, I was part of the future they were building from scratch. I didn't need revenge. I needed perspective. And distance gave me that. They didn't fall because of me. They fell because they believed they were untouchable. Because they bet on flash over function, on names over knowledge. I was just proof they were wrong. And while they struggled to recover, I wrote a new playbook. One where competence didn't have to apologize, where legacy didn't mean irrelevant, and where age wasn't a liability, but a signal of durability. I didn't destroy them. I outgrew them. They stayed in a room that kept getting smaller, chasing influence and quarterly optics. I stepped outside and found room to breathe. And that's what no one tells you about power. It's not always loud. Sometimes it looks like leaving without slamming the door. Sometimes it looks like success that doesn't need to be announced. And sometimes it looks like building something so quietly effective that the people who doubted you end up having to use it just to survive. What happened to Gloria Harper wasn't just a story of workplace betrayal. It was a reflection of something many of us have seen or felt. Being overlooked, replaced, or discarded by people who never understood your value. In a world that often chases quick results, shiny titles, and youth over wisdom, experience is quietly pushed aside. But here's the truth the world forgets. Longevity, discipline, and loyalty aren't weaknesses. They're blueprints for resilience. This story isn't about revenge in the dramatic sense. Gloria didn't burn anything down. She didn't scream, didn't sue, didn't go public. She simply left with her dignity intact and built something smarter. And when the time came, her silence spoke louder than any protest could have. That's the message here. Sometimes the best response to betrayal is evolution. You don't have to prove yourself to people who are determined not to see you. Instead, prove to yourself that you never needed their validation in the first place. We live in a time where corporate loyalty often feels one-sided, where ageism hides behind words like modernization, and where connections sometimes trump competence. But the lesson is this: quiet excellence still matters. It might not trend. It might not get applause. But when all the flashy stuff crumbles, steady hands are the ones people look for. If you've ever felt discarded, invisible, or underestimated, let this story be your reminder. Growth is the most strategic form of revenge. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. Gloria didn't need to destroy Iron Shield. She needed to outgrow it. And when she did, it collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. How to start today. 1. Reflect on what you've built that others might have overlooked. Write it down. 2. Identify a skill you have that's quietly powerful and start using it with purpose. 3. Reach out to someone who respects your value and share an idea with them. 4. Remove yourself mentally or physically from spaces where your worth is constantly questioned. Have you ever experienced being underestimated? How did you handle it? Or how would you handle it now? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more real stories of power, and share this video with someone who might need the reminder. Sometimes the best comeback is simply moving forward with clarity.